Alrighty, we are live. Good evening, everyone. My name is Seisha. I'm the social media manager at Charis Books and More, which is the South's oldest independent bookstore, and also Charis Circle, which is a nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books. And I'm so excited to be opening up Meet Me There for us tonight. Meet Me There is our monthly intergenerational poetry, fiction, and creative nonfiction experience curated and hosted by Samuel Ace. Writers exploring genre and gender boundaries are a special focus of this series, and tonight we are celebrating an exciting new poetry anthology, Essential Queer Voices of U.S. Poetry. And I just want to let our audience know that this is a monthly event. It takes place on the second Thursday of every month at 7:30. Some of our readings are virtual, like tonight, and others are in person and virtual at Charis Books. So just keep checking back in to the listing to see where we're hosting. I'm going to start us off by introducing the host, Sam Hayes, who is a trans and genderqueer poet and sound artist. His most recent books are Our Weather, Our Sea, Meet Me There, Normal Sex and Home in 3 Days, Don't Wash, and the chapbook What Started This Mess. Ace is the recipient of the Australian Lesbian Writer Award and the Firecracker Alternative Book Award in Poetry, as well as a repeat finalist for both the Lambda Literary Award and the National Poetry Series. Ace's recent work can be found in Ex Puritan, Poetry, We Want It All, an anthology of radical trans poetry, Pen America, Best American Experimental Poetry, and many other journals and anthologies. A book-length poetic essay, I Want to Start by Saying, is forthcoming, and we're very excited for it. So I'm going to pass it off to Samuel. I will be putting the links to Samuel's books in the chat in just a moment, but I'm going to pass it off and also at the same time welcome our featured poets tonight. I want to encourage our audience to leave questions and comments for the poets in the chat. And I will see you all back here at the end to close. Have a great event.
Thank you, Seisha. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this. I'm just very excited about this reading tonight and to celebrate this wonderful new anthology, Essential Queer Voices of U.S. Poetry, edited by Christopher Nelson, with an introduction by Jack Halberstrom. And so first, just thank you to Charis Books, Dartrisha Rollins and E.R. Anderson and Seisha Gupta for hosting tonight, and everyone at Charis. This just is, I feel so grateful to be in the Atlanta area and to know that my local bookstore is Charis. I conceived of this series to focus on queer and trans writers who just are increasingly bringing new books and creative energy into the world. Um, and Charis is one of the most radical and activist bookstores in this area and maybe in the whole country. And they're coming up on their 50th year of operation, which is unheard of for an independent bookstore. As a writer, I knew about Charis before I moved here, but as a newcomer to the area, Charis has become a home. It's really a touchstone for me, where I found books of old friends and met new writers, and where I could feel not so far away from beloved communities. Um, Today, there is simultaneously an incredible flowering of trans and queer literature, and at the same time, a violent backlash to that visibility, which includes censorship and outright book bans. Um, our visibility is changing lives, and Charis has consistently provided a safe space for clarity, nuance, and honesty. If you haven't done so already, please check out their website where you can buy books by tonight's authors and where you can also view the event calendar. There's something going on here almost every night. Well, some of the events are in person, some are virtual. All of them are recorded and archived on Charis's YouTube channel, including tonight's event. Again, tonight we're celebrating the publication of Essential Queer Voices of U.S. Poetry, edited by Christopher Nelson of Linden Press. Christopher is a poet and author, most recently of the chapbook Fugitive. I first met Christopher years ago in Tucson, Arizona, where we both lived at the time, and we have stayed in touch throughout the years. A poet himself, he has also always been a champion of poets, and his press, now based in Iowa, not only continues to publish important books and anthologies, including this one, as well as the previous Essential Voices poetry of Iran and its diaspora. The press website also features interviews with writers and reviews of new books of poetry. This anthology, Essential Queer Voices, follows on the legacy of what's now a rich history of queer poetry anthologies in the United States and worldwide. In 1975, which also is almost 50 years ago, saw the publication of one of the very first anthologies devoted to lesbian poetry, with the publication of an anthology called Amazon Poetry, and which was edited by Joan Larkin and Ellie Bulkin. They were founders of Out and Out Press. And that anthology featured poets such as Audre Lorde and Susan Griffin. To name just a few other anthologies from the last 50 years: Gay and Lesbian Poetry in Our Time, The New Fuck You, Troubling the Line, Reading Queer, Nepanthala, We Want It All, which has already been mentioned, and many, many others. As a young queer author in New York in the late 70s and early 80s, finding other queer poets was scattered, but not as difficult as it would have been elsewhere. There were a few queer bookstores as well as the first queer reading series around town. But New York, being New York, was not the reality of cities or towns outside its perimeter. Bookstores were gathering places, not only to find books, queer books, but as purveyors of information, zines, and other forms of dissemination, including dates. I can't state enough the importance of these early anthologies as gathering places in themselves, where a young, dyke, gay person or genderqueer person could find a collection of voices, perhaps reflective of their own. With so much now available through the internet, it's no longer a treasure hunt to find queer voices. So perhaps the purpose of the queer poetry anthology has changed. This book, as any anthology, is reflective of its editor by the choices that editor makes. Although it's hard to believe that we are already a quarter of the way through this century, this book is notable in its ability to capture a snapshot of the huge range of work produced in that time. Perhaps the purpose of such an endeavor is to provide a portal for its readers into each distinct voice found in its pages, a nudge to keep opening the doors to the voices who may sing to their individual listeners. The poets joining us tonight, Maggie Zurawski, Jos Charles, and Rajiv Mohabir, are only a few representatives of the extraordinary flowering and range of queer and trans poetry over the last decades. Look for their full bios and links to purchase their recent books in the chat. As a contributor to the anthology, I will join the readers and we will read in this order. First, we'll hear from Christopher Nelson, who will introduce the anthology. He will then be followed by Maggie, Jos, myself, and finally Rajiv. Maggie Zurawski's most recent book is The Tiniest Muzzle Sings Songs of Freedom. I just love that title, and I'm in love with her poem's ability to observe the present day to day with an often humor-filled lightness that absolutely belies their serious underpinnings. Of poetry, Maggie says, quote, "All the world is an animal. A good businessman is a zookeeper. You learn this in school. Poetry, however, is something else." Jos Charles' most recent book is quote, A Year and Other Poems, which followed the Pulitzer finalist and National Poetry Series winning Field. This new book is structured around a calendar year, a year in which grief and mourning, local, personal, and global, are its journey and its subject. Here, Jos says of poetry that it is, quote, a bridge built to burn itself, not unlike a mind. Rajiv Mohabir's most recent collection of poems is Blood Aria. Current studies are seeking to fully decode the complex language of whales, a language that continues to evolve from a consciousness that radically differs from the human. Much like the displacement of immigration, the whale navigates a parallel world to the human, but those worlds often tragically overlap. Through overarching metaphor, story, and lyric, Rajiv excavates those moments of overlap where not only the past meets the present, but but brings to the surface those parts of the present that includes worlds as complex as our own. This is a short excerpt from Rajiv's poem, Why Whales Are Back in New York City. Quote, they won't keep us out, though they send us back. Our songs will pierce the dark fathoms, behold the miracle. What was once lost now leaps before you. Now, Christopher Nelson will introduce us to the anthology. Thank you. Yeah, we can't hear you. Are you hearing? No.
Okay, can you hear me now? I'm getting some thumbs up. Yes? Okay, I'm sorry about that. I was going to try my fancy dancy headphones, but apparently it's raining here, so I was thinking that would cancel out some of the background noise. But anyway, thank you for being here. Thank you, Sam, for um, bringing us all together and for being a champion of this anthology and for your wonderful poetry. It's really an honor to share some time and space with our poets tonight. Um, the Essential Voices anthology series grew out of, so there's two books in the series now. May it live long and there be many, but this one's the second. And it grew out of really the double nightmare of the pandemic and the Trump presidency. Uh, like many people during the pandemic, I realigned professionally. I had taught for 15 years and done Green Linden Press when I could fit it in, kind of, until the past 4 years or so, 4 or 5 years. And um, I'd I'd always wanted to um, have kind of a deeper immersion in editing and curation than the biannual journal that I've edited since 2008 than that allowed. And the anthology then was sort of a way to explore that. The first in the series is Essential Voices, Poetry of Iran and Its Diaspora. Um, it features 130 poets from 10 countries, 130 poets and translators, sorry, from 10 countries. And it won a Midwest Book Award. I'm very happy with that anthology. And it, I think, encapsulates the intention of the series, which is to make less insular the various poetries of the world and to address misunderstandings and misrepresentations in the broader culture. That's the relationship between these two anthologies, which maybe at first blush seem quite different, but they're unified by the fact that um, Iran, Iranians, and queer people are often demonized in the media and misunderstood in broader culture. Um, this anthology, Essential Queer Voices of U.S. Poetry, has 100 poets, 100 living poets. That was part of the criteria um, in in curating it. Um, I was aiming for um, as much diversity as I as I could get in a book, and often I think when we hear diversity, the first thing that comes to mind is ethnic and racial diversity, and of course that's very important and I think evident in the book, but um, I also wanted diversity of age. There's 4 generations of poets. There's academic and blue collar poets. There's urban and rural. So I hope you check it out. Tonight's a sampling of it. I hope you enjoy it. And I'm looking forward to an evening of good poetry. Happy to answer any more specific questions you might have about the process of putting the book together or about any of the content after the reading. Thank you.
I believe I'm next, yes? Okay. Good evening. Thank you to Sam and to Christopher. I'm glad to be one of 100 alive poets in this. I'm glad to be alive. And I'm going to read, I'm going to open with one of the poems that is in the anthology. And then I'm going to, which is from my newest book, which came out shortly before the pandemic. And I was just starting to do readings for it. And then we went into lockdown. So I'm grateful that these poems are starting to circulate a little bit. So I'll read first this poem called My Life in Politics. Incapable of limiting themselves to petty offenses, my hands broke into my chest and choked every slumbering deity. After that, I no longer cared to argue about the nature of the flesh, whether powered by vitalist or mechanical forces. The spirits had, in either case, evaporated as easily as life from the nostrils of a drowned man. Oddly, I did begin to care about numbers, but only in exchangeable forms. Bread, I heard a man say once, and it made me a depressive materialist, not unlike a Franciscan without a dove. I collected frozen peas, greeting each one like a lost friend, then dispersing them in green streams to the hungry mouths in the surrounding counties. At home, I have an old painting to comfort me, a fine example of Impressionism from the Eastern Bloc circa 1981. In the subtle oranges singeing the trees, one sees the foreshadowing of martial law. As a child, I sat in my Western living room and watched the Molotov cocktails fly behind the iron drape. Back then, no one thought to explain to me how walls against the flight of capital might end in flames, how on TV I was witnessing soldiers clip the wings of the very same paper birds that here flew all around me. This poem is called Santa Monica. She didn't say anything I hadn't heard. I had a gram of her in my mouth. The dawn is emotions, so she and I went purely physical, spinning on one toe in damp sand, the stars slipping yellow and knifing us a place. It was our place, and there we slept, Earth. She said the thoughts on my face saw me, and that I winced too often. Her advice gave me the mountains and a flight path. It's a dirty dawn, the pink spark of Santa Monica, a light of sweet yawns, slow, a dog cloud, another life to know. Sorry, I just wanted to, I thought I had marked, oh, sorry. My marker fell out. So this poem is about anxiety about getting tenure. And I had, right when I was going up for tenure, I had this dream that I slept with the department head's wife. So this is where that poem comes from. Ladies love adjuncts. She told me to take a large plate for my troubles. Then, as we roamed the house, I tried not to draw his eye to the fact that we had fucked, but I was tempted to make her want me, so I stood still, a tree amid wood. Did it work? Yes. It let me assert myself while he talked about Hong Kong in the other room, though I knew she hadn't minded the other night. Then he and the student got distracted by two bums fighting near his car. I took the chance and grabbed her elbow, opened the cellar door. Quick, I said, I'll follow you to the furnace. And these are some new poems. This one is called "Is It Very Serious?" And it's a response to the first essay by Alice Notley in the recent collection of her essays that were published, which is an essay in which she directs the readers to directly speak to the dream before one goes to sleep. So it's called "Is It Very Serious?" Be careful. Do not make an emotion of yourself. Always keep your spirit in its house clothes. Those were his words of caution. The tyrant knows dreaming is a way to find an unlearning. I listened to him, did not press what I felt into my forehead, and so slept mostly half dead. I always am killing myself to stay alive, you see. One night, however, something in me broke forward. I used Alice. I said, "Dream, how am I meant to live?" I received only a diagnosis. You came as a soft-shell crab waiting in public opinion. Yet I knew it was enough to do something with the truth of it. I had to consider a way forward in the looking back, acknowledge the impingement of my surroundings. Looking at the sparrow as it ducked into plastic, I was not disappointed with my life, but with life in general. It was Sunday, a dry day, and cake. Joanna came in the evening for a spoon. From the hall, the problem air entered from the saddest cell, wished to enter our rooms. In the quick dark of winter unclouded other things I could finally see. And this poem is called Instant Karma. I always tell myself God does make a good sound. He is not a chamber we have made up, something we sing into. He is something like a mosquito, endless and only half heard. His music creates a camouflage for that world our bodies feel. So here we are, skins of energy, hiding these ideas against a gust of wind, an old lawn hose. But we are, strictly speaking, a new crack of dead stars. And I think I'm going to move on to a translation. This is a translation of a poem by Polish poet Miron Białaszewski, who was a gay man living in communist Poland, was obviously had to be closeted about it in his writings, but he's most famous for writing the memoir of the Warsaw Uprising. He, as a 20-year-old man, lived through the Nazis' brutal bombing of Warsaw that left it in rubble. And it's the first memoir of that event that is written from the perspective of civilians. And I recommend it. The New York Review of Books has a translation of it that came out in 1978. But his poems have been held up for a long time because of the executor of his estate. But New York Review of Books, there's a new executor, and the New York Review of Books is going to release those, or going to publish those in about, I think, in the coming year. And this is a translation I did, but I hope it will encourage people to look at his work. And it's an untitled poem. And I think I want to read this poem in particular because I think this is written before he started writing the memoir, which was something that he very much wanted to write about, but was intimidated by the project. And I see this poem as him kind of giving himself a pep talk to get ready to write this about this historical event that was the defining event of his country. So, not so long ago, when I was reading about the past, because I prefer the past, because the future is what? I don't know, something that hasn't happened and won't happen, maybe, something I won't live to see, but the past is facts. So I'm reading Pliny, one of the two. I'm just reading this one sentence, maybe two, about what? At the time, he was on a ship headed to Naples and saw the famous eruption that dusted over Pompeii. Then, wow, it hit me, it survived. Because what will survive? After us, after me, for God's sake. Notes about streetcars. I already write too much, so much, so much that I already thought to myself that Vesuvius is famous because of Pompeii. And the thing about this sentence in Pliny is that it's Pliny on Vesuvius from Pompeii. And for it to be him, he had to write other sentences besides this sentence. He had to write other sentences in order to be this Pliny, the elder, I think, but I'm not sure. And here again, I don't know if it's my fault or theirs, the two of them, or the nature of human fame. I mean, it's mechanics. And with 9 seconds to spare, I will finish. Thank you so much.
Hi, all. Thanks, Maggie. That was great. And thanks, Christopher and Charis, and for everything that led to this. And thanks, Sam, for that really beautiful introduction. Um, uh, uh, I lived in Tucson briefly too, and Sam and I shared a meal when I first got there, and it was like my first introduction to poets outside of like the internet. And Sam was so gracious, and I had, for this brief moment in time, the false belief that all poets are as nice as Sam, and that was a really nice moment. They're not. Sam's really nice. Okay. These are, I'm going to read the two poems that are from Field that were in the anthology, and then I'm going to read some newer sonnets. Pox in the pewter again, gash in that syntax. A Tran, her name, some flint already in the ash. I can't stop writing Tran, her double name. The boys coal into a natural row. The garden they flatten when they pass to what? This morning I saw you, a bell spilt in a field. Only there was no field, and a cathedral is not its bell, but some ringing, no name but to reckon with the ringing. My breasts groan, a bell I tend, and it's stunning, a thing before it's gone. And this is the second one. But when I was a child, I was so old. In my dreams, a girl, there being no pardon from the real, its form a dream, a girl. The field is an affect, yes, but what matters more than its fact? Factual, the fold, in its fallow and bent day, mattering how we call a thing, and what did we make then, being so tall, the day being old, some facts stunning the air. So lately I've been writing sonnets. I was trying to think of my queerest work, and I don't know what that means, but my girlfriend is sometimes in these poems, so I figured that's good. I had made my way to the waters of my youth with my hair, my shoelace, my handsome and weak-kneed prayer. Paradise versus paradise for us here. I was the wickedest daughter of the wickedest generation of the wickedest empire the world had seen. Each door opened to a palace of glass. Of last night's wreck remains a melon half, a wave measured, washed nearly to my feet. It will not be nonviolent. Our story will be a story of water. My girlfriend wasn't in that one, but then it was just she'll get there. in these sonnets that I'm writing, there's lots of little threads. It's part of a project I'm working on that's like prose and poems and kind of memoiristic and kind of little thoughts and things that weave together. And one of the threads is this friend and love of mine who passed away in 2020, and shortly thereafter, their Instagram profile got purchased by a bot or something, or taken over by a bot. And so I was on a run, and I got this, notification that like so and so sent you a message, and it was just extremely surreal. And I wrote this shortly thereafter. Your number lit up my screen. I click to see your Instagram profile bought back from the dead. Weeping in the park again. Light falling through the leaves. Music is what of meaning speech exempts. You alone transcribe these. I am but a donkey. I follow thee. Something with these two, I got interested in the idea of like a sonnet is like a canvas or something, where it like they're all kind of 14 lines, but some are short, some are long, and they all kind of maybe have very sonnety like qualities and address to a you, some kind of turn, but that you could fill or not fill or leave empty. So some of them are kind of shorter, like that one. I sat in windows, doorways, closets, prostrate upon the bed or walking for hours, naming the flowers I could. When misery came and went in 1995, miraculously, love took his place. Against my better judgment, I occasionally invited misery back in. He'd look at me brilliantly, like one staring at the sun, and recline on his golden door. He'd leave inevitably for another more, but things were evident. I liked how he'd watch me pile wood on the floor. Coughing through weather, bees won't stop following me in. Stained a shirt, trying to remove a stain from a shirt. Tied my leg, how could it be otherwise to you? I laid the blanket down. No swimmer am I between your horns, two of them in the waves. Come back from the dead, I bow between your hands. Come back from the dead, I bow between your hands. Forgive me, I am a painter. I do not understand landscapes. I paint them. Okay, and I'll read two more. Yeah, two more. This one's kind of transy, so I thought I'd read it. Sometimes I feel my poems get generated from a place of trying to fit a word into a poem, and just that idea alone generates the whole thing. And so I like the idea of a contraction, tutive, like to would have, tutive. So that's kind of where this poem came from. Not knowing the side of the city cemeteries form, where cinema was born, on which shore. It was not an arc, but an arbor they slid, gold-sleeved, your heart. We are in that dawn still, and I get it. I too'd have loved to have seen the daughter I'd have been. Pink-fingered, lone couch in a chamber, ridiculous, combed thing. I'd too become bridegroomish. These roses were never for you. If I should die before my name, I die in the game. You will not recognize my grave. I am nobody too. I think I'll end with this one. This is a love poem. It seemed like the right way to end. It's also a little shout out to the Long Beach Aquarium, which if you're in LA area, you should go to the Long Beach Aquarium. It's the coolest place for teens to go on dates. The window blinds split open like wings of a holy book. At the apartment door, we linger like a t-shirt over a driver's seat. My arms become too heavy for me to reach, beating the breath of my nostrils, the whole of my chest. I'd refuse the adjectives they affix to life, joy, death. Poetry is for the living, poems for the dead. Yellow scroll coral, skunk clown fish. In the Long Beach Aquarium, I'd touch your lip. I count in morning surf precisely 7 big gulps. How close it was then, our sun, to not alighting it. I'd offer you my left arm. I'd offer my right. I'd offer each word that is the genre of your lips. I'd touch you again from the inside. We'll stop there.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. Beautiful, Jos, Maggie, and thanks for that introduction, Christopher. I'm very grateful to be a part of this anthology and to be with you tonight and feel these worlds coming together of our, common pursuit. I'm going to read a few poems from Our Weather, Our Sea. It's a book of poems that came out also right before the pandemic and unfortunately is out of print now. The press, not only SPD, the small press distribution, has gone out of business, but also the press, soon after this book was published, went under. So, but I think I'll read the first poem in the book is in the anthology and was first published in another anthology called Troubling the Line, which was the first anthology of trans and genderqueer poetry, edited by T.C. Tolbert and Trace Peterson. And I always thought of it as a kind of anthem, so I'll read it for us tonight. I met a man who was a woman, who was a man, who was a woman, who was a man, who met a woman, who met her genes, who ticked the toe, who was a man who X the X and XX the Y. I met a man, I met a friend who preferred to pi than to 3 or 3.2 the infinite slide through the river of identitude, a boat he did not want to sink, who met a god who was a tiny space, who was a shot, who was a god, who was a sun, who was a girl, who met a tree. I met a god who was a sign, who was a mold, who fermented a new species on the pier beneath the ropes of coral. I met a man who was a fume, who was a man who was a ramp, who was a peril, who was a woman who carried the X and X the Y who XX'd the simple torch. I rest the man who, a woman, who tells the cold, who preferred a wind, who was a silo, a chime, who met a corner, a fuel, an aurora, a hero, a final sweep. 10 years without a name, an ordinary life. And just a couple more poems from this book. The center section of this book have a date and the time. So this one is April 10th, 12:57:11 a.m. Tell me that you know the future will traffic my security for your security, the inflatable bus, the springs, the boy parts, the stains of coup, the prance, the farm. The future will traffic my security for yours, the inflatable bus that takes us to the springs, the boy parts, the stains of coup, the prance, the farm, hidden, encrypted, and failed. I've tried to get in through the west fence, the pressure scolded for pain. It was the wrong direction, the serial surveillance that finished me off. It was the back end of sodden tradition, a hotel for gardens. April 16th, 11:33 p.m. Every time I make a mistake, I'm relieved I wore a red coat. Thankful for my raven child, my way of she. I'm relieved I met a cardinal in the snow, met Essex on a street of heels and gold. That was once you, small and priestly, hardly someone to talk about sex. That was once you, a monk in a white t-shirt and tails, a phantom beard on a beach in high heels, a 6-foot reincarnation on a bentwood chair. I think that's all I'll read from this. This is a newer poem. It's a long poem. It's called My Ears or a Field of Ears. And it started as a collaboration with the late poet Maureen Seaton, who was a dear friend and collaborator of mine. And just eternally grateful to her for the collaborative partnership that we had. My ears or a field of ears. I lie back on the couch and dream of low grasses, my back a weak margin, my ears or a field of ears, steered off course into an ocean so placental I barely recognize the form. Hear me, do you hear me? My mind empty except for the hum of the refrigerator in another room. I hum back a little song to a vibration of tiny feet making their way through a desert to lie down beside us. A life that knows only simple crises, instinctive grief, and unbreakable wisdom. The trees hold each other underground, sharing bread and important statistics, a net that binds. They keep their secret codes out of sight, a knowledge understood by the burrowers alone, ants and earthworms, moles and kangaroo rats. They give nothing away and fall asleep to the rustle and whispers of the soil. We walk into the desert to lay intention for our tiny distillation, allowing ourselves to believe in another future. We stand on a narrow crest overlooking an old stone house, close our eyes to call in the spirit of who is to come. I begin to sing as a cardinal flies across our path, surviving drought, where even the prickly pear shrivels across the desert, and only the youngest saguaros remain plump enough to find their first sky beneath mesquite or palo verde, nurse trees older than their centenarian fosters. A parakeet sings in my grandmother's yellow kitchen, her wallpaper cheery with silhouettes of carriages and women in wide skirts. Abandoned in the mountains, they rest in a cavern. Walls beaded and woven with 7-bladed swords, unsettled but humming, a resonant fundament. Here are the hidden stones, a path out from the makers of dead makers, who tell us our trees are not trees, our rivers not rivers, the roots and the honey, even death, even the cold heart of cold teeth, all belong to them. Snorts and kitchen clatter, a burp and the fizzle of scented candles, and yet another child who hears a terrible noise as the planet falls away. I throw balls high over the fence. I once knew someone out there, remembered their embrace, their lips on my neck. I watch a fox slide skinny through a tiny hole, slipping past the border where steel spikes sink deep into the earth to keep out jaguars and dendrites, rivers and mules. I bury my hand into letters and see a naked, mewling thing lying in the mess of a very brief magic. It's a wolf puppy called Zur, 57,000 years old, found in the thawing permafrost of the Yukon, bred for long enough to caress and groom, so wet I can smell her soft pelt, sweet like corn chips. She's brand new and walks just outside my door, eagerly sniffing for leftover fish. She watches us for signs as the solstice carries her loping across one great moon to another. I prefer to believe you are right about all, how the fiddlehead wraps itself around a new child like a golden scarf. No grief, just one great star, a river of quickening as common and continuous as a rush of night air. And I'll finish with the other poem in the anthology. Again, thank you everyone for being here for this reading. It's just a gift to hear you all. That poem that I just read and this one, that one was before the birth of my child, and just a kind of earthquake in my life, and on ongoing earthquake and wonder. And this poem was written just after they were born. It's called I Give Myself the Same 7 Minutes. I give myself the same 7 minutes and close my eyes inside the old refrigerator hum that takes the contents of my heart and pours them into the morning. I think to make something as precious as you, so my fingers begin to perform, but I hate to perform. So my hands rebel and take me back to bed to be with you, new creature of this world, so much like a tree or closer to a sapling or a seed, your entire life manifest in the silence of the bedroom and whoosh of your heart. In your rest, I touch your side, and you already know to stretch into my hand, eyes wide open, as serious as the eucalyptus at the corner of the house. 2 doors down, you stare at and through me to where no one and nothing performs. Dear child of creation, how do you know to do this? How does a seed know the largest branch, the respiration of the planet? Thank you.
Thank you. Oh my goodness, Sam, that was so incredible. And to hear you, Jos and Maggie, also has been such a wonderful joy for this Thursday for me. Thank you so much for organizing this, Sam. This has been just such a dream to be here with you all. And Christopher, thank you for the inclusion in this anthology. It's been so lovely to go through the pages and to read the poets that are presented here. I'm excited to read to you. I'm going to begin with one of the poems that is in this anthology, and it's called Upon Stumbling Across a Beached Bottlenose Dolphin Carcass at Provincetown. And this is actually going to be from my forthcoming book, which in 2025 will come out in September with 4-Way Books. And that book is called Sea Beast. It'll be the second of this like obsession that I have with cetacean life or mammalian life in the ocean. Upon stumbling across a beached bottlenose dolphin carcass at Provincetown, I walked the curl of the cape into a cove, the fish hook of earth, and found washed up on a February shore the carcass, its gray whitened with bird shit, eyes missing, a new blowhole pecked into its skull. Did it ignore kin and pod, though they cried out in full sun, come home, seeking instead a short-lived joy? I have taken this other world for my own, morphed into a haramkhor, eater of evil, who rips out pages of the creation story. Once, the sea was a sea of milk. Once, summer was a sea of men. In the beginning, there was water, until I drank, reckless, my beard soaked and dropping diamonds. After the beginning, a pause. The silence of winter ice. The silence of night meeting night. I'm going to read now a poem that I just kind of finished maybe 2 weeks ago. And I'm really excited to kind of like test this out with you all. It's called New York Floriography. The Victorians used to send each other messages through flowers they would send to one another. And every flower had like a coded meaning. And I thought how wonderful to think about in terms of how the poem can work sometimes. New York Floriography. The sun burns between us as need tonight. The city rises, a spring field, and we ascend floor after flight to overlook the island where you write me in flowers. These lips, 2, 4 in this, wonder in this, which rows of broken, cement in this, country of cars, in this, days beholding itself, and its gold merriment of wings in this, vernal field inflating with breath and blood, beating this. It rains again when you press into me, the diner windows streaked gray with city, a watercolor of red lights, and what books you carry before the shelf, where you opened my chest to a papus, shower, careening florets. The heart rides wind's touch as though warbler, as though ghost, as though fair glory hop to the country without terminus. I draw shut the blackout curtains to germinate inside you. How I am learning to hate trains, the theft of morning, wind dispersal, the reflecting sun on high-rise windows, feathers. I do not watch you fold time into piles of harrowed and yet to wear. You fade from the pillow and you plume into chance's bright finch. I open the drapes and the city runs into me, a flock of dandelions. So many love poems. Oh my God, who am I? I am going to read now a sequence of poems from Whale Aria. And one of the things to keep in mind is that the form of poem that I'm going to be reading is what I'm calling a whale song poem that's derived from the mathematical structures of bioacousticians who've studied and charted humpback whale song. And one of the wonderful phenomenons of this species singing is that over the course of a season, one song will change a little bit at a time into another song. So by the end of the season, it's a brand new song. So just let these sounds wash over you. Invocation. Listen. You will hear my strains echo ripple across the bay's sandy breast, across the plains of Sargasso. A faint breeze will cause the maroon kestrel of your breath to crest coral face. The hunter moon, new and my spout, a lone grave mast, a salt plume, a meteor that wings and flames into dusk. Blues deep, drips slow, below the surface to blur the what's mine into you and fills us with wine. Come, drink me, too. Sew my contours of phrase into a hymn to Manu, a hymn to Maui, into wail dark aria fire streak. We are stars bound in one psalm. Listen, you will hear my strains echo across the bay's sand, across the kelp and grass. Winding white pitches your bridle to crimson, a crest to coral and iron, searing faggots. Tonight morass is new, sprinkles in gin, a mast of mezzo-soprano, wishes and flashes into dusk. Night's Quran drips slow below the surf, we two boatmen filled with wisecracks. Come, dua me, too. Sow my control and pick an icicle to Manu, an icicle to Maui, into a constellation's fireside stride. We are surahs bound into one air. Litany my strains you hear etch ripcords across the bay's cane beat, across the Sargasso stretch. Wind pitches the winger and plunders your breech, breath and whitecap, tonight moonlight, Anubis and my sprat, a ghoul, a salutation comet plummets and flamencos into dust. Night's drinkers, slow and below the sugary surface, blur me and you and fill us with Madeira wine. Come, uncork my bota, take my drops as words into a bird song, a human song, a demigod meteorite light streak. We are many gods bound in one plan. Living, my strains you hear etch rivalries across the bay's plastic, across the stitches of seagrass. Trash bags pitched, my wingspan pinched, indentured to sonar and pen caps. Tonight, moored to Anthropocene, my sprawl spooks. A naval salute. My meteor falls and flames flam into dawn. Night slow, and below the sunrise, I am you, and you are me, despite the moon's cold light. Come. Sow my man-made words as grains of manna, the strain aboard boats, a constellation's salve. We are many bound in one plastiglomerate. And I will end here. Thank you so much for your attention.
Wow, thank you so much, all of you. This is a time for discussion. We have a few minutes left in the evening, and just beautiful work. Please, anyone out there listening, put your questions in the chat if you have any about the anthology, about individual poems, poets, anything you'd like. I am not seeing anything right now, any questions, but I do have some to start us off. And again, any of the readers, feel free to ask questions or comment. So here's my first question. I guess, and Christopher, I missed part. Unfortunately, my sound went out, so I missed. You might have already answered this question, but and because I missed part of your introduction. But what does it mean today as a queer or trans writer to be gathered, just widely different voices, under a moniker of identity? Does it mean something different today than it did, say, 20 years ago, 30 years ago?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I imagine there's, a degree of subjectivity in how poets would feel about that. But I would point out to a feature of the anthology that I think's pretty fascinating. So there's a lot of ways, of course, one can organize an anthology. And that's a kind of fascinating puzzle, conundrum, joy when putting one together. Do you do it alphabetically? Do you do it thematically? Geographically? Right? There's so many ways. Well, this one's chronological, and by that I mean um, the eldest poet comes first, and that's Frank Bedart, and the youngest poet, Torrin Greathouse, concludes the anthology. And I do think that, I mean, who reads an anthology linearly? I don't know, maybe some people do. I tend to jump around a lot, um, but when you do read it linearly, I think you can see a sort of trajectory of a cultural, I don't know if you could call it a development, but a difference in some way. Frank Bedard opens the book with his poem Queer and talks about the um, conundrum of coming out or not, or not, or not in the 40s and 50s. And um, and it's exciting to me to sort of juxtapose that with some of the later poems. And I just think there's a real, sort of freedom and openness that younger queer writers can experience that maybe wasn't as available in generations prior. That's not to dismiss, of course, the tremendous backlash to a greater mainstream acceptance of queerness. In fact, that backlash is one of the reasons I wanted to do the book, and it's very real and it's very threatening. Um, so that's something to think about.
What about you?
What about you?
Thanks,
Thanks,
Christopher. Now
Christopher. Now I'm getting. Uh,
how about Rajiv or Jos, Aggie? How do you see that question?
Well, I was laughing when Jos was reading, and she was like, "Oh, okay, I better find a poem with my girlfriend in it." And when Christopher first wrote me, and I was like, "Okay, I have to go back 2 books to find something really gay." Like, it's not been a problem recently, so I'm not writing about it. And and then he was like, "I actually want these poems." I was like, "Oh, okay, now we're talking." Like, but that's the question, like, because the last time I did another reading for the anthology, and I felt like the writers were like just the aesthetic difference. Like, I was like, but I was the last reader. I was like, am I queer? Like, am I gay enough to be in this reading? Because I haven't said anything about my pussy. But I mean, I'm putting it in crass terms, but I mean, I think it's a real, it's like, did John Ashbery, or were they in gay anthologies? I don't know.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah.
They were early on. But,
I don't know. So I was appreciative that Christopher put me in there, because, yeah. But the question is like, where is the identity? Is it in the poetry, or is it, I don't know, or how to think about it, or does it register in structurally in the rhetoric somehow? Or, I mean, if it's not the overt subject of the poem.
well, yeah. Just it is interesting that way, how much that's changed, and maybe just, again, visibility, the realities of our lives, that I mean, queer poets have always written about not just being queer, but at the same time, I guess the gathering under of identity holds that all together. But I also appreciate what you were saying, Christopher, about in organizing this chronologically to see a movement to see a change. I mean, I hope the anthologies keep coming, and that they get bigger and bigger. They just get bigger and bigger. Yeah. Oh, here's a question from Julian Carter. Is our queerness, our transness separate from the way we experience and co-create meaning?
That's a big question.
Any thoughts?
I can try. Yes. No. I don't. I think. Yeah, it's like queerness is such a multivalent, like opaque category, it seems to me, where it's like it kind of collapses into the singularity of like identity, like I am queer because XYZ, whatever, I identify as XYZ, or I have sex in XYZ or, way. And then there's like the other sense in which it's like some kind of affect or like mannerism or behavior, at which point like everything's kind of gay, but I think like this can shortchange all the other sort of individual attachments that like people might have to their own sexuality or to possibility, hope, different ways of articulating these things that don't just like collapse into the, I don't know, like a form that one marks on, when applying for healthcare or something, and I think like that can just really vary amongst people. And so for me, it feels almost more like a reservoir of like history and symbol that can be like dipped into, that is one register with which I move through and out. So like, yeah, sometimes in one sense, it's like constitutional of how I make meaning, but in another, it's like a thing that I dip into very consciously and at times don't dip into very consciously. And they like all seem to be happening with respect to their scales at the same time, in some kind of way.
Thank you, Jos. We just have a few more minutes. Rajiv, did you want to add anything to?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I think it's phenomenological, meaning like our orientations, how we experience the earth is definitely coded in our bodies as antennae, right? And so like I think that meaning is made through that orchestration, or that like kind of like translation first, right? From the world outside into our understandings of selves in place. And so I have a hard time thinking of a disambiguation between, my own particular identity categories that I'm picking up today, that I'll drop in like 2 minutes and pick up another one, as it serves either coalition building or like my own kind of, bodily and spiritual needs and wants. So like I think that like yes and no. Like I love what you were saying, Jos, about how like it can be this reservoir that we dip into, and I think like maybe there's only reservoir, that we are all enmeshed in like these like overlapping waters. I think also about like being assembled into this book. I think of like queerness, and this is like maybe like some of you will resonate with what I'm about to say, but like when I think about gender, I definitely say I'm like an 80s 90s fag. And what that means is that like there's like this like experimentation, there's this transgression, there's also like the idea of like bending into whatever it is that you want to be in the moment. I think queerness as a category tends to, or used to actually have that plasticity, right? Where it didn't necessarily mean like an identity category, but it meant bucking any identity category. So there was like this like lack of like fixedness, I think, in queerness, or the way that I'm understanding queerness. And so like I think like it's funny now to like use it as a kind of like a shortcut to say like, okay, I practice these non-normative things, like in qualities. You know, I might be this, I might be that. Today, this is what I'm doing. And if we can, like, I think of like an anthology is very much like a cross section, or like a crossroads, where very much like we are looking at a time and a place. And so for me, it's an interesting kind of like thing to be like, oh yeah, this was queer when it came out, like, you know what I mean, like it was queer, and we can like locate the ways in which that we're bucking identity categories instead of like being predictive about queerness. So like, yeah, like also what you were saying, Sam, I think that there's like the future anthology is also going to look very differently because queerness is constantly in flux.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, this is all just kind of word vomit, so.
Oh, hardly at all. But I do think that might be a really good place to end. I have many other questions, and I wish I could stay with you all night, but I just want to respect Charis's time, and yes, I think it's coming back in. So thank you, everyone. I just my heart is very, very warm right now, and I hope that we can do this again. I want to encourage everyone next month on June. I think it's the 13th. I can't quite remember the date. It's the second Thursday in the month. Will be the final event of this year for this series. We're going to take a break in July and August, and then come September. So the series will be going on next year. But that will be a trans poetry showcase. It will be kind of an anthology in itself of just new books that have come out in the last year. It was a way to include a lot of folks that I wish I could have on the series, but also really celebrate the richness of trans poetry, and how much work is being put out into the world. So keep your eye out for that.
And is that going to be in person or?
Not going to be in person. People from really all over. So we will again be virtual.
Awesome. Well, we'll see you back here next month. But thank you all, our featured poets, everyone in the comments. Give them another round of applause for their incredible readings and their incredible work overall. I want to remind everyone that you can buy Essential Queer Voices of U.S. poetry from Charis Books by clicking on that teal button right below all of us. When you support Charis Books, you allow us to keep putting on program. Oh no. Did I? Okay. Can you hear me?
We can still hear you. Yes, we can still.
Okay. Well, when you support Charis Books, you allow us to keep putting on amazing programs such as this. So we appreciate everyone for joining us tonight. This is going to be our goodbye. I'm waving, but you can't see me. But goodbye, everyone. Have a great night.
Take care, everyone.